My name is Sarah Pickett and I am 71 years old. On the crisp, sunlit morning of Mother's Day 26, my 32-year-old daughter sent a notification to our family group chat that made my kitchen suddenly feel very small and very quiet. I will quote her exact message, letter for letter, because the wording tells you everything you will ever need to know about what 24 years of unchecked arrogance can do to a person's soul. Her text read, "We picked out the restaurant for tonight and confirmed the reservation under your name. You are covering all 12 of us like always, so please bring your platinum card. Also, mother dear, dress one level up from your usual attire. It is an elevated dining environment and Whitney's parents will be in attendance." I stood by the marble counter of the home my late husband Joseph and I purchased back in the spring of 1981, holding my morning cup of black coffee in one hand and staring down at the glowing screen with the other. I read those 3 sentences twice. Then for the first time in nearly 5 years I let out a soft. I did not type out an angry rebuttal, nor did I demand an apology for her condescending tone. Instead I tapped out 5 simple words on my keyboard and hit send. Enjoy. I am flying to Italy. Before I tell you exactly how my arrogant children walked blindfolded into the devastating financial and legal trap that had been waiting for them inside that private dining room, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members who confused your dignified silence with weakness. Within 7 seconds of my reply hitting the server, my daughter Hannah fired back a rapid response. "Mom, please do not be dramatic just because we asked you to wear something respectable." 30 seconds later, my 36-year-old son Tyler sent an eye roll emoji, followed almost immediately by a thumbs down icon from his status-obsessed wife, Whitney. They genuinely believed I was bluffing. They thought I was throwing a mild elderly tantrum from the kitchen of my suburban Asheville home, sitting in my slippers and waiting for them to coax me out to pay their tabs. What none of my children had bothered to inquire about during their entire adult lives, what none of them had ever asked in 24 years of self-absorbed entitlement, was the simple, staggering truth behind the establishment they had just booked. They had no idea that the luxury restaurant they chose to show off their fake wealth already had my full legal signature carved into its foundational charter. By the time the head captain walked out of the kitchen with their $3,000 check and the wax-sealed envelope I left in his custody, every single wealthy patron in that dining room would know my name too. Let us go back 36 hours before that fateful Sunday dinner. It was precisely 7:48 on Saturday morning, May 11th, 2026. I was standing at the kitchen sink pouring my first cup of dark roast coffee, completely black with no sugar, exactly the way Joseph used to drink it every morning of our 43-year marriage. The pale golden light streamed through the eastern window over the sink, catching the dogwood trees in the side yard that were just beginning to shed their white spring blossoms. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop, then it buzzed a second time and a third, vibrating with the familiar chime of the Pickett family group, a digital conversation thread where I had remained almost completely silent for the previous 6 weeks. I picked up the device and watched the incoming messages stack on top of one another. First came Hannah's initial declaration announcing the restaurant's selection and demanding that I cover the entire 12-person check as usual. Next came Tyler's follow-up message 30 seconds later, "La Cucina Divina, 6:30 sharp tomorrow evening." Whitney already secured the private dining room at the back so the girls have space to move around. Then came the final, stinging instruction from my daughter-in-law Whitney herself, "Mother dear, please dress one level up. It is an elevated environment and my parents Harrison and Beatrice are joining our table to celebrate." I set the phone face down on the cool stone counter and slowly looked down at my hands. They were entirely steady, there was not a single tremor in my fingers, nor was there any racing in my pulse. Then I turned away from the kitchen and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the back of the house to Joseph's private study. I had been systematically sorting through his books, papers, and old accounting ledgers for nearly 3 weeks, preparing the house for a major transition, but I had intentionally avoided opening the deep oak drawers of his main executive desk. The warm afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting narrow bars of light across a thick leather binder sitting right in the center of the desk blotter. The binder was labeled in Joseph's distinct angular handwriting with 3 simple words: La Casina Files. I pulled back the heavy leather desk chair where my husband had spent thousands of quiet evenings, sat down and opened the cover. Before we dive into the contents of that 37-year-old binder, I must tell you about Dr. David Lynn and the warning that changed my trajectory 8 months prior. It was late September 2025 on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was walking down the fresh produce aisle at the Ingles supermarket on Hendersonville Road, selecting ripe Bartlett pears for a tart I planned to drop off at Tyler's house, when an unnatural, icy coldness suddenly radiated down the entire length of my left arm. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim, and the polished linoleum floor tilted violently to the right. I managed to set the bag of pears on the display shelf before I sat down heavily on a wooden crate of winter squash. The store manager called an ambulance within minutes, and I spent the next 3 days in the cardiac monitoring wing at Mission Hospital. It was a mild myocardial infarction, the specific kind of cardiac event that medical professionals refer to as a gentle warning shot across the bow. I did not answer him immediately. I turned my head toward the large window of the hospital room. Across the paved parking lot, a magnificent red maple tree was just beginning to turn scarlet at the tips of its branches against the gray autumn sky. Dr. Lynn stood up slowly and buttoned his white laboratory coat. "I am not a psychologist or a priest, Mrs. Pickett. I am simply a cardiologist who spends his life looking at the physical consequences of emotional endurance. But the human heart has an extraordinary memory, and the body will eventually reject the burdens that the mouth refuses to speak aloud. So I will ask you one final time before I sign your release papers, when do you actually start living for Sarah?" We scheduled an appointment with the senior commercial loan officer at National Commerce Bank on Patton Avenue to secure the additional $43,000 required for the prime downtown lease and kitchen equipment renovation. I remember sitting in that polished mahogany office wearing a neat beige wool skirt and a cream-colored cotton blouse that my mother had carefully hand-ironed for me before she sent it down from Tennessee. The loan officer, a man in a sharp charcoal suit with a heavy gold signet ring, spent 30 minutes reviewing our financial statements without making eye contact with me once. He directed every single question, every comment about cash flow, and every observation about inventory margins exclusively across the desk to Joseph. Finally, the banker leaned back in his leather chair, tapped his fountain pen against our lease agreement, and chuckled patronizingly. "Mr. Pickett," the banker said, pointing the tip of his pen toward the signature block where my name was typed alongside Joseph's. "I see you have listed your wife as the primary commercial co-lessee on this building contract. Surely we should move her name down to the secondary spousal guarantor section. Running a high-volume fine dining establishment with liquor liability is a complex corporate undertaking, and we generally prefer our primary operators to be the household head." On the grand opening night of La Cucina di Vita, December 14th, the dining room was packed to absolute capacity by 7 o'clock. At 9:30, during the peak of the dinner rush, I stepped into the walk-in refrigerator to check on our veal stock reserves and found Joseph leaning against the stainless steel shelving units with tears running down his face. He was exhausted, exhilarated, and completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what we had built. I walked back out to the espresso machine, pulled a double shot of dark espresso into a thick white porcelain cup, and carried it back into the cold room. Joseph took the cup with his right hand and wrapped his left hand firmly around my wrist, pressing his forehead against my shoulder. To understand why my children grew up so completely disconnected from the reality of our work, you must examine the subtle poison of social status and how it slowly infected their perception of our family. Take my daughter Hannah, for instance. In the early spring of 1996, when Hannah was 14 years old and attending a private day school across town on a partial academic scholarship we fought to secure for her, she befriended a girl named Madison Pratt. Madison's father was a newly appointed senior managing partner at a major regional investment brokerage in Charlotte, and her family had recently constructed a sprawling glass-walled contemporary mansion on Town Mountain Road featuring a subterranean wine cellar and a private tennis court. Hannah became utterly infatuated with Madison's lifestyle, the imported European cars, the designer wardrobes, and the effortless arrogance of people who had never washed a greasy pan or balanced a checkbook in their lives. "Just leave me alone, Mom," Hannah screamed through the door, her voice trembling with adolescent rage and bitter embarrassment. "Please just go downstairs and stop cooking. You are humiliating me. Why can't you just be a normal mother who works in an office instead of smelling like garlic all the time?" If Hannah's betrayal was born out of adolescent insecurity that hardened into adult snobbery, my son Tyler's detachment was a deliberate, calculated surrender to the ambitions of his wife. Tyler was 32 years old and completing his surgical fellowship at Mission Hospital in May 2018, when he brought Whitney Harrington to our home for the very first time. Whitney was 29 years old, strikingly blonde, meticulously groomed, and possessed the careful, measured posture of a young woman who had been groomed from birth within the carpeted lounges of the Biltmore Forest Country Club. Her mother, Beatrice Harrington, insisted on accompanying them to our Sunday dinner, a bold, uninvited intrusion that I should have recognized immediately as an inspection of our social viability, rather than a friendly parental introduction. For that evening I spent 2 full days preparing a classical Milanese osso buco, slow-braising cross-cut veal shanks with aromatic vegetables, white wine and rich broth until the meat melted off the bone like butter. Joseph walked down to our temperature-controlled home cellar and brought up 2 rare, exceptional bottles of Chianti Classico from a boutique vineyard in Tuscany that we had personally visited and befriended during our 25th anniversary trip back in 1996. During the meal at our dining room table, the conversation remained superficially polite. Beatrice Harrington picked delicately at her osso buco with the tines of her silver fork while her eyes roved systematically across our dining room, taking in our solid oak furniture, our polished hardwood floors, and finally resting on a simple black and white framed photograph hanging near the china cabinet. The picture showed Joseph and me standing proudly on the sidewalk in front of our small, original Lexington Avenue storefront back in 1989, wearing our white work aprons and holding our first health inspection certificate. Beatrice smiled, a thin, polite curving of her lips that did not reach her eyes by even a millimeter. "How industriously quaint," she murmured softly before turning her attention back to Tyler to discuss the upcoming charity regatta at the lake. After dinner concluded and we finished our espresso, Tyler walked Whitney and her mother out down our flagstone driveway toward Beatrice's luxury sedan. The house had grown quiet, and I began gathering the empty dessert plates and wine glasses from the table to carry them into the kitchen. The double-hung window directly above the kitchen sink was propped open several inches to let in the cool May night breeze. As I stood at the sink rinsing the porcelain plates under warm water, the clear night air carried Beatrice Harrington's voice floating across our side yard with crystalline. She was speaking to Tyler beside the open door of her car, her tone low, confidential, and dripping with upper-class condescension. "She really tries very hard to be gracious, Tyler darling," Beatrice remarked softly to my son. And the braised veal was quite past for home cooking. "It actually reminds me of the rustic meals our family used to hire local cooks to prepare for us at the summer cottage when Whitney was a little girl. Your mother has that distinct, charming energy of domestic help who takes immense pride in their kitchen duties. You must make sure we keep future family dinners hosted at the country club so she does not feel pressured to overextend her limited entertaining capabilities." I slowly turned the brass faucet until the warm water ran completely cold over my hands. I rinsed that single porcelain dessert plate for nearly 3 minutes until every drop of oil and crumb of biscotti was washed down the drain. When Tyler and Whitney officially married in October 2019 at the Grand Ballroom of the Biltmore Forest Country Club, Joseph and I were assigned to Table 14, a small round table located directly beside the swinging double doors of the banquet kitchen, where the catering staff rushed back and forth all evening carrying heavy trays of overcooked filet mignon. Whitney's parents, along with their wealthy country club friends and corporate investors, occupied tables 1, 2, and 3 directly surrounding the elevated bridal day. Over the course of the next 5 years following Joseph's unexpected passing in March 2020, my invitations to family gatherings grew shorter, more formal, and increasingly infrequent. The annual Christmas Eve dinner invitations turned into late afternoon drop-in requests where I was expected to bring 3 dozen handmade cannoli and sit in the sunroom with the small children, while the adults drank champagne in the formal living room. When my granddaughters Emma and Maddie celebrated their birthdays, my invitations were consistently scheduled 2 hours before the main party, so I could drop off my gifts and leave before Whitney's high society friends arrived with their children. Whitney greeted me at the edge of the stone patio with a brief perfume-scented air kiss near my right cheek before leading me toward the long teakwood dining table set with crystal mimosa flutes and silver cutlery. She paused at the head of the table, placed a manicured hand lightly upon my shoulder, and introduced me to the assembly of wealthy charity organizers. "Ladies," Whitney announced with a bright, performative smile, "this is Tyler's mother, Sarah. She used to work in the local restaurant world many years ago before she retired. Past tense, of course. Now she enjoys gardening and relaxing at her house across town." The conversation around the teakwood table instantly ceased. Several of the Junior League women nervously shifted in their seats and took quick, uncomfortable sips of their champagne. Across the table from me, Catherine Green immediately dropped her silver fork onto her porcelain plate with a sharp, distinct clatter and stared down at her lap, her ears turning bright pink with embarrassment. I did not move. I reached out with my right hand and wrapped my fingers around the cool glass stem of my water goblet. I felt the crisp, chilled condensation against my palm, anchoring my mind in the present second. I looked directly across the table into Whitney's pale blue eyes and allowed a faint, knowing smile to curve the corners of my mouth. You might be quite surprised by the exact caliber of dining rooms I have experienced in my life. Whitney dear, I said, pitching my voice so lightly and smoothly that it sounded like a casual observation between friends. And you might be even more surprised by who actually owns the tables you are sitting at. 4 hours later, Stush's SUV pulled into my driveway. He walked into my kitchen carrying a thick, legal-size black leather briefcase under his arm. Antonios was now 51 years old, a brilliant internationally celebrated executive chef whose innovative culinary techniques had earned him 2 consecutive regional culinary awards and a reputation as one of the finest restaurateurs in the American South. He sat down opposite me at the kitchen table, opened the black leather briefcase and laid 2 separate stacks of embossed legal documents directly across my placemat. That clause is written into page 42 of the Master Operating Charter in perpetuity. Zia, Antonio replied firmly without a moment's hesitation. As long as any restaurant operating under the La Cucina di Vita brand exists anywhere on this planet, the private dining room will remain officially designated as the Sarah Pickett Room. That condition is non-negotiable from both my side and the corporate board. It is permanent. I sat in absolute silence for nearly 2 minutes while the afternoon light shifted slowly across the granite kitchen island. Did you orchestrate this nomination, Antonio? I asked quietly. Antonio smiled warmly and wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. I submitted your formal nomination portfolio with Uncle Joseph's original letters back in the spring of 2023, Zia, but I was not the only one who signed the endorsement petition. Over 40 executive chefs, food historians, and restaurant critics from across the United States submitted personal testimonials detailing how your work at La Cucina di Vita shaped their professional lives. You earned this honor with every single hour you spent standing over those hot stoves when no one else was watching. He leaned forward and placed his broad hand over mine. And there is one final component to our proposal, Zia. The James Beard Foundation has formalized an educational partnership with the Master Culinary Institute in Modica, Sicily, the historic mountain village where Uncle Joseph was born. The institute has invited you to serve as their primary visiting professor of traditional gastronomy for the upcoming summer semester. You will teach master classes to 40 advanced culinary students selected from 12 different countries around the world for 3 months, living in the family home on Via del Carmine. Uncle Joseph always said he wanted you to see the lemon trees in Modica when your kitchen work was finally done. It is time to come home, Zia. My flight to Sicily must depart on Sunday evening, May 11th, Mother's Day, I said, keeping my eyes locked onto his face. Because I know my children, I know that by the time Mother's Day weekend arrives, Whitney and Hannah will have booked a table at our restaurant to celebrate their own vanity. They will expect me to sit at the head of their table, listen to them boast about their social status, and hand over my credit card to pay for their expensive wine when the meal concludes. I intend to be 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean when that check arrives at their table. It is officially time, Jeppy, I said aloud to the evening breeze moving through the cemetery trees. Our 46-year shift at the stove is finally over. I am taking our name and going home to Modica. When I walked back to my car 45 minutes later, the silver full moon had risen high above the mountain ridges. I unlocked my door, drove back to my house, poured myself a small glass of aged Sicilian grappa from the private reserve bottle Joseph had brought back from Naples in 2014, and drank it slowly in the absolute quiet of my kitchen. Caleb had sat on the dusty wooden floorboards of my attic for 23 minutes carefully reading through every single page of those 30-year-old culinary reviews. He read about how his grandmother had engineered the financial architecture of one of the city's most legendary dining institutions. He read about how the signature pasta alla Pickett had been named in her honor by his grandfather. He looked at the embroidered initials SP on the red apron and he realized with sudden, overwhelming clarity that the quiet elderly woman who baked his birthday cakes and whom his mother treated like an unpaid babysitter was actually a formidable, celebrated pioneer in the American culinary world. Caleb did not pull out his iPhone to record a viral video about his discovery in the attic. He did not mock his grandmother or exploit our family history for social media engagement. Instead, he opened the private notes application on his device and typed out a single, solemn sentence: delete the draft script mocking Grandma's cooking. Never make a joke about her again. He hesitated for 3 long seconds, tapping the tines of his silver fork against the edge of his porcelain plate. Did you ever meet anyone really famous during your life? Like before you retired and started staying home all the time? You probably wouldn't recognize his name from your internet videos, sweetheart, I replied gently, standing up from the table to clear my coffee cup. His name was James Beard. I sat down heavily upon the wool rug of his study, leaned my back against the bottom drawers of his oak desk, and slowly translated his words into English. Over our 43 years of marriage alongside a native Sicilian, I had mastered his language completely, reading every single nuance, every dialectic turn of phrase, and every emotional inflection with crystal clarity. His letter read as follows: Mia, a beloved Sarah, as for our business affairs here in Asheville, leave the entire future of La Cucina di Vita in the hands of our nephew Antonio Russo. Antonio has our blood in his veins, he has the fire of the kitchen in his chest, and he loves our enterprise with the absolute loyalty that our own children consciously chose to discard. When the proper time comes for you to step away from the table, sell your equity share directly to Antonio and let him carry the Pickett name forward into the next generation. Trust him completely, he will never betray your legacy. 2 weeks precisely before Mother's Day, just 7 days after I signed the $4 million buyout agreement with Antonio, my daughter Hannah drove up to Asheville from Charlotte unannounced on a chilly Wednesday evening around 6 o'clock. Her husband Greg was working late at his financial firm, and Caleb was attending an evening study group at his high school, so Hannah arrived at my house entirely alone, driving her silver crossover. I was in the kitchen preparing a traditional buco braised veal shank using Joseph's original 1993 autumn recipe, simmering the meat slowly in white wine, carrots, celery, and rich beef bone broth. I set 2 bone china plates upon our formal dining room table, lit 2 slender white beeswax candles in brass holders, and opened a bottle of vintage Montepulciano d'Abruzzo from my climate-controlled pantry reserve. Hannah squinted her eyes toward the ceiling as if she were searching through a mental filing cabinet of trivial, unimportant memories. Then her face cleared and she let out a light, patronizing chuckle. Oh, right, that fancy Italian place down by the square where Whitney loves to host her junior league dinners. I think Dad might have mentioned once when I was in college that you two used to consult for their kitchen or manage their inventory back in the 90s. Why do you ask out of the blue like that? I sat in silence across the mahogany table, watching the candlelight flicker against the polished brass holders. I thought about the 14,000 sitting securely inside my private high-yield checking account funds, generated directly from my quarterly profit-sharing dividends at La Cucina di Vita. And then I thought about 17-year-old Caleb sitting quietly on my dusty attic floorboards 6 weeks earlier, reading through 30-year-old restaurant reviews with genuine wonder in his dark eyes and asking me about James Beard over warm blueberry pancakes. I looked at my daughter and nodded my head slowly once. Enclosed within this envelope is the $14,000 your mother requested from me tonight to purchase your college vehicle. This money belongs entirely to you, to be utilized strictly for your future independence and educational development, according to your own internal compass. You are 17 years old now, and you possess the intelligence and moral clarity to discern between genuine substance and superficial theater. When the time comes for you to make your choice regarding where you wish to study next autumn, follow the truth you discovered inside my attic box rather than the expectations imposed upon you by others. Tell your mother whatever you choose regarding this check. The funds will clear your personal youth savings account by Friday afternoon. With all my pride in the man you are becoming, Grandma Sarah. I stood perfectly still by the kitchen sink, holding a dripping wet romaine leaf between my fingers while the cold water ran over my hand. I allowed exactly 2 seconds of complete, absolute silence to pass across the telephone connection before I spoke. Tyler, I asked, pitching my voice into a tone of curious inquiry, may I ask what specific motivation prompted Whitney to select La Cucina di Vita for our Mother's Day dinner out of every dining room operating across the city? I waited for a long, heavy beat of silence to settle across the line, a pregnant pause that hung between mother and son like a physical weight in the air. For a brief, fleeting fraction of a second, I could hear Tyler's breath catch slightly on the other end of the telephone connection. He was 36 years old, a brilliant, highly trained medical doctor whose diagnostic instincts were sharp enough to detect the faintest arterial murmur in a human chest. Somewhere deep inside the suppressed, forgotten corners of his mind, he recognized the dangerous, icy stillness vibrating beneath the quiet cadence of my voice. But rather than pausing to question that stillness, rather than asking his mother what was truly happening behind her calm exterior, Tyler simply chose the path of least resistance and pushed forward to close the conversation. "It has just been confirmed by my son Tyler 10 minutes ago, Antonio," I informed him quietly. "They have booked the private 12-person dining room at La Cucina di Vita for this coming Sunday evening, May 11th, precisely at 6:30. And there is a critical additional detail regarding their guest list that you must incorporate into your kitchen preparations immediately. My daughter-in-law Whitney is bringing her parents, Harrison and Beatrice Harrington, to join the head of the table for the Mother's Day service." I was 20 years old and working the primary pasta station inside our Biltmore Avenue kitchen during that brutal winter of 1995. "Zia," his voice trembling with suppressed magnificent emotion across the wire. "I distinctly remember watching Uncle Joseph walk out to the back alley by the delivery bay every single Tuesday and Thursday evening at 9 o'clock after our dinner rush concluded. I remember watching Uncle Joseph carry 2 heavy insulated thermal containers out to Harrison Harrington's rusted station wagon parked in the shadows behind our dumpsters. Inside those containers were double portions of our nutrient-dense bone broth reduction, our house-made organic spinach ravioli and fresh roasted root vegetables meals specifically engineered by you to be easily digestible for a man undergoing intensive radiation treatments. I remember watching Uncle Joseph hand those thermal containers directly through the car window to Harrison Harrington twice a week for 6 consecutive months without ever allowing our cashiers to ring up a single dollar of charges on our dining room registers. When Harrison attempted to hand Uncle Joseph his gold watch as collateral for the food during his darkest month of treatment, Uncle Joseph pushed his hand back across the car door and told him to save his watch to check the time when his cancer was fully in remission. I felt my fingers tighten around the telephone receiver as a wave of profound poetic satisfaction washed across my chest. "Whitney ordered 4 bowls of pasta alla picket for her Mother's Day table," I asked. "Mother dear." Whitney chimed brightly across the connection, her voice echoing slightly against the high ceilings of her luxury sunroom. "I am just conducting my final logistical roundup for our Mother's Day celebrations this coming Sunday evening. Tyler informed me on Wednesday that he successfully verified your platinum credit card on file with the event coordinator at La Cucina di Vita, so our payment processing is completely streamlined for the private dining room. I just wanted to personally verify that you have received all of my dress code updates from our family group chat and ensure we are all completely aligned on the evening's aesthetic parameters before we arrive at the restaurant." I leaned back inside Joseph's heavy leather executive chair, folded my hands neatly across my lap, and looked up at the framed wedding photograph of Joseph and me hanging on the bookshelf directly ahead. "I have carefully reviewed all of the messages you and Tyler submitted to our group chat over the course of the week, Whitney dear," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone mild and accommodating. "I understand that we are meeting directly at the valet stand of La Cucina di Vita precisely at 6:20 on Sunday evening, and I understand that your parents Harrison and Beatrice will be joining the head of our table." I held the telephone receiver 6 inches away from my ear for a brief half-second, staring at the brass carriage clock ticking across the bookshelf, before bringing the speaker back to my ear. "I will ensure that my attire for Sunday evening is completely appropriate for the specific dining room you have selected, Whitney," I replied calmly. "You mentioned in your text message earlier that you reserved the private dining room at the back of the establishment. May I ask what specific atmosphere that private room provides for our extended family gathering?" "It sounds like a truly historical and dignified space to share a family meal, Whitney," I replied smoothly without allowing a single vibration of sarcasm to alter the gentle cadence of my voice. "I am certain that when your parents Harrison and Beatrice take their seats at the head of that 16-foot oak table beneath those historic photographs on Sunday evening, they will feel a profound connection to the exact foundation that built that room." "You are such a cooperative treasure, Mother dear." Whitney chimed brightly across the wire, completely blind to the absolute finality ringing through my words. "We will see you directly at the valet stand precisely at 6:20 on Sunday evening. Have a wonderful, relaxing Saturday at home." I walked out of Joseph's study, locked the oak door behind me, and proceeded directly down the hallway to the master bedroom to complete the final packing procedures for my transition to Sicily. The vintage Globetrotter leather suitcase that Joseph and I had carried across Europe during our 1978 honeymoon was resting open upon my king-sized bed, lined with clean white cotton garment bags. Over the course of the next 2 hours, working with methodical, unhurried precision while the Friday evening darkness settled across the Appalachian Mountains outside my window, I carefully arranged my physical existence into 38 pounds of checked luggage. At precisely 9:15 on Saturday night, under the cover of a light spring drizzle falling across the city, I drove my sedan downtown to Biltmore Avenue and pulled into the dark service alley directly behind the delivery bays of La Casina di Vita. Standing inside the covered rear doorway under the amber security light, completely concealed from the bustling dining room inside where 80 Saturday evening patrons were currently enjoying their entrees, was Captain Marco. Marco was now 58 years old, a consummate, dignified dining room professional who had worked the primary cabaret captain station at La Cucina di Vita since the winter of 1992 when Joseph had personally hired him away from a luxury hotel in Boston. Marco wore his classical black tuxedo with crisp white linen and a black silk bow tie, his posture straight as a military officer as he stepped out into the rain to meet my car. I reached out across the car window and pressed my hand briefly against Marco's white-gloved fingers. "Thank you, Marco. Tell Antonio I will telephone the kitchen from Catania once my connecting flight touches down on Monday afternoon." I rolled up my window, backed my sedan out of the dark service alley onto Biltmore Avenue, and drove home through the quiet spring rain. Once I stepped inside my house at 10:30 that night, I unlocked my mobile phone, opened my digital voice recorder application, and recorded a brief 23-second personalized voicemail greeting, specifically engineered to activate across my mobile line the exact second my airplane wheels left the runway at Asheville Regional Airport the following evening. I listened to the playback once to verify the audio clarity across my home microphone, saved the sound file directly to my primary carrier profile and turned off the device. Then I walked to my bedroom, set my alarm clock for 7 o'clock Sunday morning and slept for 8 solid, dreamless hours with my vintage Globetrotter leather suitcase resting packed and ready beside my bedroom door. Now we arrive at the morning of Sunday, May 11th, 2026, Mother's Day. I awoke at precisely 6:45 to the clear golden light of early morning slanting through my eastern bedroom window. I walked into the kitchen, brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, and sat down at the breakfast table with the front news section of the New York Times spread out across the placemat. The official James Beard Foundation press release announcing my unanimous selection for the Lifetime Achievement Award was not scheduled for public nationwide distribution until Tuesday afternoon, May 14th, so the Sunday morning culinary pages remained filled with the standard holiday restaurant reviews and seasonal spring recipe guides. At precisely 8 o'clock, my mobile phone chimed 3 consecutive times across the kitchen table as 3 incoming Mother's Day text messages arrived simultaneously from my family members. I picked up my mobile phone and ignored Tyler's and Hannah's messages completely, leaving them marked as unread inside my digital application. I opened Caleb's individual message thread, tapped out a brief 4-word reply across the screen, and hit send. "I love you too, Caleb. Watch everything tonight very carefully." I locked the front door of my house, verified that my security keys were securely tucked inside my leather handbag, and climbed into the comfortable back seat of Trevor's sedan. "Good evening, ma'am." Trevor greeted me warmly from the front seat as he initiated his GPS navigation screen. "Our routing system shows we are heading directly south to Asheville Regional Airport for an evening departure. Would you prefer taking the interstate highway directly, or would you like to take the scenic route straight down Biltmore Avenue through the historic downtown corridor before we hit the highway?" Trevor's vehicle cruised steadily past the restaurant valet stand at 20 miles per hour. I did not ask him to slow down the car, I did not tap my fingers against the tinted passenger glass, and I did not turn my head to look back across my shoulder as the green canvas awning of La Cucina Vita receded into the distance behind us. "Keep driving straight to the airport terminal, Trevor," I said smoothly from the back seat, adjusting my pearl earrings in the rearview mirror. "We have a flight across the ocean to catch tonight." Whitney walked into the private dining room at the head of the procession wearing her champagne silk cocktail dress, her posture radiating pure unadulterated high society triumph. She immediately approached Captain Marco standing near the formal service credenza and gestured imperiously toward the large, ornate armchair located at the absolute head of the 16-foot oak table. "Captain," Whitney instructed him brightly, her voice echoing off the cherry wood paneling, "please ensure that the primary head of the table remains completely reserved and unoccupied for my mother-in-law, Sarah Pickett, she is driving over from her house across town right now, and as the host who is generously covering our family Mother's Day feast tonight, she deserves to sit right at the center of attention where everyone can toast her generosity. Once the party was seated around the oak table with the ornate head chair remaining conspicuous and completely empty at the center of the room, Tyler glanced impatiently at his gold wristwatch and looked up at Captain Marco pouring chilled spring water into their crystal goblets. Captain Marco, Tyler asked sharply across the linen, could you please verify our master reservation listing on your digital podium? I want to confirm whether my mother, Sarah Pickett, called your reception desk to report any traffic delays driving down from North Asheville this evening. At precisely 7:15 in the evening, after the initial round of luxury cocktails had been distributed to the adult guests, Whitney signaled to Captain Marco to present the reserve wine list. Working with the grand, performative flourish of a woman who fully intends to pass the financial burden of her tastes onto someone else's credit card, Whitney bypassed the standard regional wine selections entirely and ordered 2 consecutive magnums of 2019 vintage Brunello di Montalcino, directly from our temperature-controlled Italian reserve cellar, and exceptional, highly allocated Tuscan red wine listed on our master beverage menu at precisely $280 per bottle. Alongside the $560 of reserve red wine, Whitney ordered 5 separate luxury appetizer platters for the table to share. Hand-sliced imported prosciutto di Parma paired with house-made mozzarella, jumbo lump blue crab cakes with saffron aioli, carpaccio of prime beef tenderloin with shaved black truffles, crispy calamari with lemon reduction, and 3 orders of our seasonal wild mushroom bruschetta. By the time the appetizer plates were cleared from the 16-foot oak table at 7:45, the 12-person party had collectively committed exactly $1,480 of charges against the restaurant register, before a single primary entree had even been fired inside the kitchen. Tyler chuckled warmly across his appetizer plate, slicing a piece of beef carpaccio with his silver knife. You know how Mom gets when we bring her into genuine high society environments, Hannah. Tyler agreed with a patronizing shake of his head. She spent 30 years working inside basic noisy kitchen environments where everyone yells over boiling pots and wears greasy aprons. Whenever we bring her to a refined dining room where people speak quietly and understand complex wine pairings, she gets deeply insecure about her background and freezes up. We will just order her a takeaway portion of pasta when we finish our meal tonight, and I will drop it off at her porch on my drive home from the hospital tomorrow morning. Harrison Harrington did not laugh. He turned his head slowly away from his daughter, looked down the length of the 16-foot oak table toward the dark cherry wood paneling, and stared directly up at the central framed black and white photograph hanging on the south wall beneath the amber sconce light. He looked at the 36-year-old woman in the white chef's coat standing next to James Beard in 1991, looked back across the table at the empty ornate armchair sitting at the head of the room, and felt the blood slowly drain out of his face until his cheeks were as pale as the double damask linen placemat resting under his hands. He did not utter another word to Whitney or Tyler for the remainder of the entree service. He simply sat perfectly rigid in his chair with his hands folded tightly across his lap, staring down at the polished wood while his memory traveled 30 years backward to a cold, dark serves SLE behind the kitchen dumpsters where a broad-shouldered Sicilian man named Joseph Pickett used to hand him thermal containers of organic spinach ravioli through his rusted car window without ever asking for his gold watch as collateral. At precisely 7:50 in the evening, 10 minutes before my boarding group was scheduled to be called to the jet bridge, I unlocked my mobile phone screen for the final time on American soil and opened the Pickett Family Group chat application. The digital thread was buzzing with active self-congratulatory holiday activity. Whitney had uploaded 3 high-resolution photographs to our family group thread and shared them directly to her public social media profiles. The first photograph showed Whitney and Beatrice clinking their crystal glasses of $200 Brunello di Montalcino together across the 16-foot oak table beneath the crystal chandelier, accompanied by the public caption, "Celebrating Mother's Day with my incredible mother Beatrice inside the exclusive Sarah Pickett room at La Cucina di Vita. Blessed high society fine dining." The second photograph showed my daughter Hannah, leaning across her plate of pasta alla Pickett with a wide, theatrical smile, captioned, "Enjoying the most extraordinary squid ink crab tagliatelle with my sister-in-law Lindsay. Culinary perfection mother and daughter." And the third photograph, the image that captured the absolute undeniable essence of their 24-year blindness, was a wide-angle group snapshot showing all 11 family members seated around the 16-foot oak table, raising their wine glasses toward the camera, perfectly framed so that the ornate empty armchair sitting at the head of the room was clearly visible directly in the center of the shot. Beneath that group photograph, Hannah had typed a mock-pitying public comment. "Our table is complete except for Grandma Sarah, who decided to skip our amazing gourmet dinner to stay home at her house in her slippers watching television tonight. We miss you, Mom. Next time we will take you somewhere simple with a buffet." Senior life family first. I sat by the glass terminal window watching the blue runway lights blink across the evening tarmac. I did not type out an angry response to Hannah's public mockery, nor did I post a comment correcting her false narrative. I simply opened my leather handbag, retrieved the small velvet jewelry pouch from my side pocket, and carefully unclipped the classic luminous pearl earrings that Joseph had purchased for me in Florence during our 40th anniversary celebration. I placed both pearls inside the soft velvet pouch, pulled the drawstring tight, and dropped the pouch securely into my handbag alongside my passport. Exactly 10 minutes later, at 8 o'clock sharp, the gate agent announced the boarding protocol for Group A across the terminal loudspeaker. I stood up from my vinyl chair, picked up my leather handbag, and walked alone down the carpeted jet bridge onto the aircraft. I took my assigned seat at window 14A, fastened my seatbelt across my lap, and watched the mountain ridges surrounding my home of 45 years slowly disappear into the dark spring night as the jet engines surged with power and lifted us into the sky. Across the table from Whitney, my daughter Hannah let out a loud, ringing laugh that bounced off the dark cherry wood paneling. "You hit the nail right on the head, Whitney." Hannah agreed loudly, raising her espresso cup in a mock toast. "Do you remember when Tyler graduated from medical school back in 2018, and we took Mom out to that formal French bistro in Charlotte to celebrate? She literally wore proud black rub-soled walking shoes with her dress because she said her kitchen arches hurt from standing on linoleum all day. I spent the entire dinner praying none of my corporate marketing clients walked into the dining room and saw my mother dressed like a school cafeteria cook." Caleb slowly turned around from the south wall and looked directly down the length of the 16-foot oak table at his uncle Tyler and his mother Hannah. His dark eyes were absolute, unwavering, and burning with a fierce, dignified clarity that made the entire room suddenly fall dead silent. "That is not just some old historical chef, Uncle Tyler," Caleb said aloud, his voice clear, steady, and carrying across the wood-paneled room without a single tremor of adolescent hesitation. "That lady in the white chef's apron is your mother, Sarah Pickett. And that photograph was taken inside the James Beard House on East 12th Street in New York City, back in October 1991, right after she cooked a 7-course showcase dinner for 40 national food critics. This entire restaurant belongs to her." Whitney's right hand, which had been reaching gracefully toward her crystal water goblet, froze completely in midair. Her pale blue eyes darted down across the itemized computer receipt resting inside the leather folio. Printed in bold, unmistakable black numbers across the bottom total margin of the receipt was the final financial obligation, 2247.18. And printed directly below that dollar figure, stamped in sharp red corporate ink across the signature verification block, was a single permanent billing declaration: Comrie credit card on file ending in 4402 Serapicat, officially removed from current accounts upon verifi ogre inspection. May 10, 2026. All charges payable directly by table hose. At conclusions of surface, Captain Marcos reached smoothly across the table and tapped his white glove finger against the top margin of the first wax-sealed cream envelope resting beside the bill. "If you will read the exact text written across the face of the notification envelope, sir, you will discover your mother's current geographical trajectory," Marco informed him quietly. A paralyzed, suffocating silence slammed down across the 16-foot oak table, a silence so intense that the faint, rhythmic ticking of Harrison Harrington's gold wristwatch could be heard clearly from the opposite side of the room. Whitney collapsed backward against the cushions of her chair, burying her face inside her trembling hands while a low, whimpering sob escaped her throat. Sitting next to her, Beatrice Harrington stared down at the $3,000 computer printout with wide, horrified eyes, clutching her designer pearl necklace with tight, claw-like fingers as if she were suddenly struggling for oxygen inside the wood-paneled room. Tyler and Hannah stared at Antonio as if a ghost had suddenly materialized directly out of the dark cherry wood paneling. "Antonio," Tyler whispered, his eyes widening in complete shock as he looked at his older cousin's face for the first time in nearly 15 years. 37 years, Antonio continued, his voice ringing with passionate, magnificent justice across the private room while Caleb's iPhone captured every single word in high-definition video. My Aunt Sarah quietly maintained a 25% primary equity ownership stake in this flagship dining room, alongside her complete ownership of the physical real estate and the foundational recipe patents that built our brand reputation across the United States. And last Friday afternoon, precise 48 hours before you sat down at this table tonight to order 4 portions of her signature pasta dish, she officially finalized the outright cash sale of her 25% equity stake directly to my corporate holding group for exactly $4,100,000. Captain Marco raised the large cream envelope directly beneath the crystal chandelier where every single family member could observe the red sealing wax. Working with slow, deliberate, unhurried precision, Marco slid his silver letter opener beneath the flap, broke the crimson wax seal with a crisp, echoing crack, unfolded the 2 sheets of custom Milanese stationery inside, and read my exact written words aloud to the 16-foot oak table in a deep, carrying baritone that reached every single corner of the private room. You have spent your entire adult lives expecting me to apologize for taking up room in your polished, high society world. Therefore, I have made the conscious, permanent decision to remove myself from your world entirely. As Captain Marco reads these words aloud to your table, I am 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, flying home to our family stonehouse on Via del Carmine in Modica, Sicily, where I will teach young chefs who actually respect the fire of the kitchen. I am taking my mother's red apron, I am taking your father's memory, and I am taking my name along with me. When Captain Marco finished reading the final syllable of my letter and slowly lowered the cream stationery to his side, the private dining room was so profoundly, terrifyingly quiet that the sound of Whitney's rapid, hyperventilating breaths rattled across the wood paneling like dry leaves in a winter wind. And then, from the north side of the 16-foot oak table directly opposite Whitney, 73-year-old Harrison Harrington slowly pushed his chair back from the placemat and stood up to his full height. His elderly knees cracked audibly in the silence, his face was set in lines of absolute, granite fury, and his gray eyes burned with a fierce moral indignation as he looked down at his daughter Whitney and his son-in-law Tyler. "Harrison, Daddy, please," Whitney whimpered across the table, holding out her trembling hands toward her father as tears streaked her expensive foundation. You have to give Tyler your Centurion card to cover this check right now. If Marco calls the police or reports our account to the credit agencies, it will completely destroy my junior league standing before the autumn gala." Whitney shook her head wildly side to side, her lips trembling in terror as she stared up at her father. No, Daddy, I don't know." Without waiting for Beatrice or Whitney to utter another word, Harrison Harrington turned on his heel, grabbed his wool overcoat off the brass wall rack, and walked straight out through the double doors of the Sarah Pickett room into the rain, leaving his wife and daughter completely abandoned at the head of the table. Across the table, my daughter Hannah let out a hysterical panic gasp and turned toward her husband Greg Bell. "Greg," Hannah screamed across the linen, grabbing his blazer sleeve with desperate fingers. "Give Marco your corporate financial card right now. We have to pay this check before Antonio calls the police and it ruins my marketing retainers across Charlotte." As Captain Marco processed Beatrice's Centurion card to close the final financial ledger of the Mother's Day service, my 17-year-old grandson Caleb slowly pushed his corner chair completely away from the oak table. He stood up to his full 6'1" height, tapped the screen of his iPhone 17 to successfully save the 45-minute high-definition video recording directly into his encrypted cloud storage drive, and walked with calm, measured steps down the length of the Persian carpet, directly toward where Master Chef Antonio Russo stood near the service credenza. The entire room watched in silence as Caleb stopped directly in front of his older cousin, looked straight into Antonio's dark Sicilian eyes, and extended his right hand across the space between them. "Chef Russo," Caleb said clearly, his voice across the wood-paneled room with absolute dignity. "My grandfather Joseph taught my grandmother Sarah how to love the kitchen when they opened this building together in 1989. By the time my Lufthansa transatlantic flight touched down on the tarmac at Frankfurt International Airport at 7:40 on Monday morning local time, Caleb's 9-minute video had already accumulated 400,000 organic views and over 18,000 comments across the United States. And by Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, when the official James Beard Foundation press release dropped nationwide confirming my unanimous selection for the Who's Who Lifetime Achievement Award, class of 2026 alongside my Sicilian professorship, Caleb's documentary had exploded across the global internet with 4,800,000 verified views, completely dominating national social media trends and regional news broadcasts from Charlotte to Atlanta. I am here now, Salvo, I replied softly, pressing my hand against his linen shoulder while a profound, indescribable sense of homecoming settled deep into my chest. Take me home to our house. I stood under the warm Sicilian sun outside Catania Airport, tapped out a brief smiling reply across my screen. I am home safely, Caleb, my darling. Keep taking up the room and keep your knife sharp. I have a room waiting for you on Via del Carmi whenever your classes finish for the summer. And slipped my mobile phone securely into my pocket for the 3-hour drive up into the Iblian Mountains. In Charlotte, my daughter Hannah's corporate marketing agency lost 2 of their largest regional anchor clients within 31 days, including a massive $500,000 annual advertising contract with a luxury hotel chain, whose executive managing director happened to serve directly upon the board of trustees for the James Beard Foundation, and recognized Hannah from Caleb's viral video. Due to the catastrophic loss of corporate retainers, Hannah's annual executive salary was slashed by 22% during the July quarterly review, and she was officially removed from consideration for a prestigious regional business leadership award she had spent 2 years lobbying to secure. Furthermore, when Hannah attempted to demand that Caleb take down his viral video from the internet, my 17-year-old grandson simply packed his personal belongings into 3 cardboard boxes on the 1st of June, moved out of his mother's Charlotte house completely and relocated directly into my empty Asheville residence on Biltmore Forest, where he lived rent-free while preparing for his autumn semester at AB Tech Culinary College. Hannah did not speak a single word to her son for 7 consecutive months following his departure from her home. In Asheville, my son Tyler discovered that professional clinical respect inside a major surgical hospital cannot be maintained when your colleagues watch a 9-minute video showing you sitting in spineless silence while your wife attempts to force your 71-year-old mother to pay a $3,000 restaurant bill. Over the course of the summer, Tyler's senior surgical partners at Mission Hospital became distinctly freezing cold and formal during clinical rounds. His referral volume for high-profile elective procedures dropped by 35% as local physicians directed their patients to rival surgical groups across town, and he was quietly passed over for the appointment as clinical director of the outpatient vascular wing during the August board elections. Stripped of his surgical prestige and drowning in $94,000 of revolving credit card debt, after his platinum cards were frozen by the bank, Tyler retreated inside his clinical office and began sleeping on his hospital cot 4 nights a week to avoid the toxic arguments raging inside his home. That summer in Modica, teaching 40 passionate young culinary students from 12 different countries around the world who addressed me every single morning with the respectful title of Zia Sarah, I experienced the most vibrant, exhilarating season of my entire 71 years of existence. And on the morning of August 15th, right during the peak of the Sicilian summer heat, a taxi pulled into the stone courtyard of Via del Carmine carrying my 17-year-old grandson Caleb. He had flown across the ocean from Asheville on his own, carrying his grandfather Joseph's old leather knife roll tucked under his arm and wearing a clean white double-breasted prep jacket that Master Chef Antonio Russo had personally gifted to him before he departed South Carolina. Caleb spent the entire month of August living inside the guest room of my stone house, waking up with me every morning at 5 o'clock to visit the local fish markets on the coast, learning how to roll authentic Sicilian egg pasta dough by hand across my wooden kitchen table, and sitting beside me under the courtyard lemon tree every evening drinking iced espresso while we talked about James Beard, family resilience, and the exact margins required to run a proper kitchen. That is my complete story: 1 16-foot oak table, 1 hand-stitched red cotton apron, 1 wax-sealed letter read aloud by a loyal captain to a silent room, and 1 woman who finally decided to take up all the room she earned. If my journey across the ocean reminded you today that your own name was carved with strength somewhere deep inside your soul before you allowed the world to make you forget it, take this moment as your absolute non-negotiable sign to stand up and reclaim your table. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from right now. Hit that subscribe button to join our kitchen family. And I will see you right back here for our next chapter. Keep taking up the room, keep your knives sharp, and never ever apologize for who you are.